Hello and welcome to Africa Live, where we bring you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Famida Miller. Also coming up in the next half hour. Revolutionary innovation, South African engineer takes electric power to the people. And regional kings, Uganda leads East African countries in FIFA rankings. Three people have been killed and several wounded in Central African Republic's capital, Bangui. Violent clashes erupted after demonstrators threw stones at the motorcade of transitional President Michel Djodotia, whom Seleka brought to power. Police and members of the paramilitary and the armed force intervened and opened fire. Djodotia dissolved Seleka earlier this year in a failed effort to re-establish order. CAR has descended into chaos since northern Seleka rebels seized Bangui in March, ousting President Francois Bozize and igniting sectarian violence. Now, it's been 8 months since rebels seized control of the Central African Republic. Since then, the country's degenerated into near anarchy, with rival gunmen jostling for territory and power. For ordinary people, every day is a fight for survival. CCTV's Robert Nagila's filed this report.
Kabru Gypsy has just been through the most harrowing 24 hours of her life. Her daughter, just turned 2, almost died before her eyes.
I came yesterday but had no money. Then she just got worse.
Karu has malaria, one of the many children in this city sick with the disease. And just like them, Karu's family had no money to pay for treatment. So her mother gave up the family's most prized possession.
Across Africa, we take cell phones for granted. But here in Bangui, they can be the difference between life and death.
The rebels that seized control in March have spent the month since then squabbling over spoils and worse. According to UN officials and rights groups, they've terrorized the population, murdered and raped, and of course, looted. Hospitals were among the first targets. Outside the capital, there are no government hospitals functioning anymore. The hospital has no basic medicine such as antibiotics, and there's no X-ray machine anymore.
We try to provide whatever little medicine we get from aid agencies such as MSF and the Red Cross.
At the moment, the complex pediatric is the only functioning children's hospital in the Central African Republic. The hospital is so stretched that the administration has had to put out a tent with extra beds just to accommodate the children. For Bangui's other vulnerable people, the mentally ill, it's just as desperate.
This institution has been swamped with new cases since the rebellion. Since March, we've received over 1,000 new patients, and we continue to receive more.
Most of these patients have been traumatized by what they've seen and heard in the city since the rebels took control. We do not have the medication to treat them, Gomosa says. It's a tragic situation. Many here feel the world has abandoned them. Kabru Gypsy knows she has a lot to be thankful for. Her daughter's still alive. But Bangui is a city where few dare to think about the future. Robert Nagila, CCTV, Bangui, Central African Republic.
Now, the Central African Republic is rich in gold, diamonds and uranium, but the United Nations is warning that decades of instability there could now turn into a full-blown genocide. As our UN correspondent Stephen Fee reports, the worsening security situation is putting pressure on the UN to deploy a formal peacekeeping force to a country in chaos.
Its institutions in shambles. The Central African Republic has become nearly lawless. Ruthless carnage has driven 500,000 people from their homes, and the United Nations says more than 1 million face severe food shortages. That's more than a quarter of the country's entire population.
The situation in the country is very worrying. It's really on the verge of total collapse, and we have shockingly high levels of violence and human rights violations.
And now the conflict appears to be taking a sectarian turn. Back in March, Muslim Seleka rebels overthrew the government and seized the capital, Bangui. Since then, they've been accused of indiscriminate killings, lootings, and sexual violence.
But also, and that's a bit more new, by groups that call themselves anti-Balaka, which means anti-machete, who are retaliating for Seleka abuses against civilian Muslim populations with frankly, the same levels of violence and brutality.
In an interview earlier this month, Valerie Amos, the UN's top humanitarian official, told CCTV her people can barely leave the capital.
United Nations premises were all looted across the country. We are beginning to go outside of Bangui again, but it has taken us much longer than it should have done.
UN Security Council members are mulling the deployment of blue helmet troops to be used as a peacekeeping force. The African Union, or AU, has about 1,000 troops on the ground and plans to scale up to a 3,600-member mission, but that's not likely until next year.
To bring back a measure of confidence from the population, you need a strong peacekeeping mission on the ground. Right now, you have a few AU peacekeepers who have been deployed with not very positive effects, sadly. So we need blue helmets on the ground quickly.
And Amos says the UN's global appeal for humanitarian dollars is coming up short.
We have a huge role to play, not just on the humanitarian side, but in stabilizing the institutions, stabilizing the political situation, and getting the funding in.
Of course, the decision to send UN blue helmets to Central African Republic ultimately rests with the Security Council, where some members are wary of getting involved in a grisly and potentially costly conflict. Security Council members are expected to discuss the Secretary General's latest report on the CAR later this month. Stephen Fee, CCTV, New York.
The Democratic Republic of Congo says it's ready to sign what it describes as a declaration that reflects the defeat of M23 rebels if it's in national interest. This is despite pulling out of Ugandan-hosted peace talks a day earlier. Congo objected to signing a deal with rebels and accused mediator Uganda of taking sides. Susan Mangeli has more.
Congo and M23 rebels were due to conclude a deal on Monday, but Congolese negotiators rejected the wording of the document, arguing that it would not sign a deal with the force it had defeated. Congo said it wanted a simple declaration from the rebels that they would not take up arms and accused Uganda of taking sides. The rebels said that the document had been agreed upon days in advance.
We can't allow anyone to define our own situation. We have defined it as a situation that's been sorted out in a military fashion and which needed to be reinforced by a political commitment from the rebellion side to never go back to violence.
Uganda has rejected charges of bias, saying Congo had made no formal complaints in 10 months of mediation.
We will protest in front of the international community regarding this behavior, which violates all principles of international law, all the laws governing international coexistence and respect towards neighbors.
UN experts have accused Uganda and Rwanda of backing the rebels during the unrest. Both countries denied the charge. Meanwhile, Uganda has said peace efforts between the Democratic Republic of Congo government and defeated M23 rebels will continue. Uganda, which is hosting and mediating the long-running talks, said it was expecting new rounds of talks but gave no dates. Last November, M23 rebels occupied Goma. They withdrew under intense diplomatic pressure that led to the opening of talks in Uganda. However, the fall of Goma led to a revamping of Congo's army and the strengthening of the UN force and its mandate in Congo. When peace talks faltered, rebels were driven from all the remaining towns they occupied in recent weeks. Susan Mungeli, CCTV.
In other news making headlines, officials and security experts from the East African Community member states are gathering in Burundi's capital, Bujumbura, to discuss security issues facing the region. The main agenda is how to deal with the threat of terrorism emanating from Somalia. At the opening ceremony, Burundi's first Vice President, Bernard Busukoza, reiterated the country's commitment in the fight for stability across the continent. The three-day conference began on Wednesday. Elsewhere, as many as 300 people are feared dead after a ferocious storm and days of heavy floods in northeastern Puntland in the Horn of African region. Weather experts from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization say the flooding was severe. Infamous pirate hotspots such as the port of Ale, from where Somali gunmen have launched attacks far out into the Indian Ocean, are some of the worst affected areas. The government of the semi-autonomous Puntland has described the situation as a disaster, with entire villages having been destroyed. He's appealed for international assistance.
The country should not be divided by flood waters. It needs a quick response. The people must be helped, and we will do our best to help them.
Finally, hundreds of foreign workers, mostly from Africa, were seen being packed onto buses heading towards a deportation center in Riyadh on Wednesday evening. This as Saudi police began a clampdown on visa violations. The world's top oil exporters pushing its 9 million foreigners to resolve irregularities in their passports or face penalties, including prison and deportation. The raids, which began 10 days ago, have seen tens of thousands of people with incorrect paperwork being deported. It's time for us now to take a break. When we come back, benefits of best practice. We focus on how the continent can learn from China's land reforms.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need some trade and justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life.
We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Now, land reforms and rural development have been a hot conversation topic in China. Liu Yang visited Qingchun village in southwest China's Sichuan province to find out how new policies are benefiting local communities.
A big harvest for Zhou Mingqiang's family. These organic vegetables will soon be on people's dinner tables. Zhou says his earnings have doubled since 2008. That was when the village introduced the land reform policies.
I previously earned 15,000 yuan per hectare. Other villagers have contracted their land to me, so my income per hectare has increased by 5,000 yuan. So now I make much more than before.
The system allows farmers to lease their contracted land or transfer their land use rights. And for Zhou, higher income could lead to better housing and more opportunities for his children to get a good education. Last year, the per capita net income of farmers in this village rose 21% compared to 2010.
In recent years, people's incomes have grown and their living conditions have improved. We have found many ways to support villagers, such as through technology and marketing.
The latest policies are aimed at tackling China's urban-rural wealth gap. It is hoped that they will enhance the overall land reform effort, which is intended to double rural incomes. Earlier this year, the CPC Central Committee issued the #1 document which targeted many rural issues. The CPC Central Committee agreed to strengthen policies to increase farming-related subsidies and the farmers' incomes and to expand demand in rural areas. It also emphasized the needs to protect the farmers' rights. Land management needed to be improved so farmers would not be restricted or forced to transfer their property. Experts say more transparency is needed within the collectives in rural regions. They play a major role in representing farmers' rights in land transfer negotiations. And many people say it is imperative that extra finance now are offered gas to the people that need it most. Liu Yang, CCTV, Sichuan Province.
Now, for more analysis on the CPC committee resolutions, we're joined live in studio by Professor Macharia Munene, an international relations lecturer with the United States International University here in Nairobi. Welcome to Africa Live.
Thank you very much.
Now, if we look at some of the resolutions passed, one of them is a call for increased policies on farming-related subsidies. So what can Africa learn from some of the lessons put forward by the Chinese model?
Well, the issue of subsidies is critical to the production of food, ensuring that the granary is always full. And many countries, where they want to be sure that they will not go hungry or they will not be begging for food, you subsidize agriculture. And when you do that, then the farmers will be happy to produce more. And the main thing is to ensure that the country as a whole, the state, is not short of food because of maybe some small things here and there. And subsidies is one of the food security policies that a country adopts in order to ensure that there is always food for the people in the country. So this is a good thing to do, and the African countries should look at it and do the same thing.
Now, one of the other things we've seen that come out with regard to land management is we see new security policies come out, as well as rights for farmers. Does this have any resonance with Africa at all?
Yes, the issue of land tenure is a thorny one. Kenya is one place, Zimbabwe, South Africa, particularly those former colonies which were white settler colonies, where many of the Africans are still crying about land systems and the land management, the use. The policies, the changes being adopted in China may be looked into, have some lessons. What can we do in order to reform the land tenure system so that more and more people feel they have a share, they own the part of the land, they own the state and the land involved in it, so that no one feels left out. And that is a very positive thing to do. And I'm sure many countries like Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Kenya are watching. And even Angola, those countries that Africans used to lose, not to have access to the land, now can be watching that to see how is it done and can we go forward in a better way.
Now, one of the other areas that the continent and China have in common is growing populations in both places. So is there a place for Africa to adopt and develop people-friendly policies that would help the continent?
Of course, it is necessary to adopt people-friendly policies, which means that you ensure that everybody is full and everyone has some work to do, which means growing the economy and looking for different ways of enabling people to produce for themselves. What we do not need is to encourage people to be lazy. They have to work in order to produce and enrich the economy, enrich the country. And if the country is enriched, it is also strengthened and therefore able to withstand external threats and other pressures. Because a country that is internally weak, whether it's in the area of food production or is in an area of social awareness and control and involvement, then it's vulnerable to external pressures and threats. So Africa can learn how to maybe become more self-sustaining as opposed to being dependent all the time. And that comes with empowering the people. So the process of empowering the people to strengthen the state and themselves is a very positive one that everybody should look into.
Now, as we've seen over the last several years, is China and Africa do have improving and good bilateral relations. Are there lessons that can be taken from Chinese policies broadly that can be applied? Is it a case of copy and paste?
No, it's not a case of copy and paste. In fact, it would be terrible if it was copy and paste. It's a question of learning the good things, the positive things. What is it that is positive in China that one may learn from and improve on it? It's not just copy, but improve on it and adjust, tailor-made, make it to suit the African conditions. The same thing with the Chinese. What is it that they can look for the in Africa, pick it, not copy, but learn from it, adjust it to fit the Chinese environment. So it's a question of learning on both sides. But the most important thing is to be focused on the ultimate goal. What is the ultimate goal? And the ultimate goal is the improvement of the lifestyle of the people, the strengthening of the state, and the happiness of the people that is involved. And when that is done, then you can see that it's a very positive. It does appear that China is now in one of those 30-year cycles from the late 40s, 78, and now this time is that those cycles when they regenerate themselves. And maybe it's time also for Africa to look into, can we regenerate ourselves in a positive way?
Thank you so much for your time today. We're speaking there to Macharia Munene, a lecturer at the US International University here in Nairobi.